So, welcome to America's Heroes Group. I'm Sean Claiborne, your host. Today, we have one of the great shows we're going to put together. What you're going to see this week. It's going to be one of the greatest shows you've ever seen in your life, in the words of Donald Trump. America's
Oh,
Heroes Group, our digital roundtable media show. Today is Wednesday, October 16, 2024. Now, we're going to talk about something that's very, very important, and that is what type of book could be written that might make Donald Trump look a little bit worse than sometimes he does to himself. And that's why we have a certain person here that's really, really good at this type of stuff. Her name is Stephanie Kalota. She's a U.S. Army veteran, and she's also was a sergeant first class, and she served in the Army and the Reserves. And she's a founder and creator of the Veterans Legislative Voice. Now, tell us a little bit about a book written by a certain journalist that has been around for a very long time. And also, what was your reaction to some of the things that he put in this book?
okay. Well, first, there is a book that published on October 15th. It is written by Bob Woodward. It's called War. And Bob Woodward, if you're not familiar with that name, he has been a longtime writer and editor with the Washington Post. He's most known for his work with the Watergate coverage back during Nixon. And of course, he's covered many times movies, TVs, documentary, different things like that. He's also a winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He has authored 22 best-selling books. So we're waiting for War to make that list as well, which would be really interesting. And this is a book that is a intimate, sweeping account of one of the most tumultuous and dangerous periods in presidential politics and American history, with Trump, Biden, and Harris at its center. And that's directly from Simon & Schuster's webpage. So it's given us a behind-the-scenes story of 3 wars, Ukraine, Middle East, and the struggle for American presidency. The biggest thing that's been making the news lately is about Trump sending Putin, particularly to Putin, that we assume for his personal use, COVID tests, when these tests were very scarce during the COVID pandemic. And this was early on in the pandemic. And it's caused a pretty big uproar everywhere.
Mm. Yeah, so that's been in the news and been especially today on when we're recording this, recording on Sunday for Wednesday. One of the things that's kind of scary about that is that he puts in his book that from the people he's talked to in the intelligence agency, that we have like over a 50% chance, is what the intelligence agency is reporting, of war, of global war, like World War III type of war, maybe even
Yes.
nuclear war. Because of what's happening in Ukraine, the Middle East, and also what's happening with this election and the consequences of who wins this election. Because no matter who you like the most, it's pretty much a tight race. Now, I still have my own opinions about who's going to win, but it's very, very tight right now. What do you say about that?
The geopolitics of this is pretty tense and heated, and it will be a interesting thing to watch. Very glad that I have anxiety medication for it. So I really encourage other people to also hopefully medicate legally and safely during this time, because it is going to be pretty rough and a little bit scary for some people. It is that way because Trump has been said that he wanted to pull out from NATO. He doesn't agree with the whole principle of it. He doesn't agree with paying for it and then having to protect and work with other countries that are part of NATO, which is very frustrating for those that understand what NATO is all about. And NATO is one of the reasons why we haven't had World War III yet. I mean, we have gotten close multiple times, but it's still very scary because if we pull out of NATO and other countries start fighting other countries, especially if they're outside NATO, or a non-NATO country goes after a NATO country, it can cause a lot of issues, another global war. And we're very close to that, like you said, with the Middle East, with Ukraine, and probably other places, because North Korea, Iran is really pushing buttons that could make it far outside the Middle East. They could actually go towards other locations. So it can be a pretty scary situation.
Yeah, and now Bob Woodward, if people don't know, he's one of the he's very respected, and he focuses on presidents since Nixon. He's one of the dynamic duo of what we know as what the book was called, All the President's Men, probably his first great book. He was one of the guys that basically broke the Watergate story.
Yes.
When nobody pretty much knew about it. Him and Carl Bernstein worked together on that story. And when it hit the Washington Post, it pretty much blew up and changed history and pretty much forced Nixon out of the White House. So he's pretty good at getting to the bottom of things, and actually a very good researcher. And at 81 years old, he hasn't lost a step and gotten any nothing but better with what he does. That's something I think is really, really important to note. He has said in an interview today, actually, on Sunday morning on CBS, he actually said that from his experience going all the way back to Nixon, he thinks Trump is the worst president that he's ever researched or pretty much investigated.
Yeah. It's and not many people might remember or even know about that what's going on between Bob Woodward and Trump. There's actually a pretty big beef between them, and that's from a 2020 book that was published in late 2020, and I believe it's called Rage. And what he did was he written a book covering a lot of things, especially with his interviews from Trump, and he had recorded these interviews. Well, when Rage was coming up to also be converted to an audio book, Bob Woodward used the actual interview tapes, the audio, and put it into the audiobooks. Trump sued him for the royalties over that. I believe almost $50 million for that. And I don't know what's the end result of the lawsuit. I'm still trying to find that one because it was originally filed in New York. And then late last year, it was moved to Florida. And ever since late last year, I have not been able to find an actual resolve of that. So that might still be ongoing. So there is some beef going on between those two figures. And that's what Trump is claiming, is that Bob Woodward made the story up because Trump sued him for money. And so he's trying to get back at him.
Well, the thing is that even the Kremlin has admitted that they received it. I mean, there wasn't anything. I mean, the Kremlin itself said, "Yeah, we got it," and they support Trump.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they want him to win because that's no better ally they could have, with what's going on in the world today. So, with their actions, they would hope that Trump wins. So they don't really care how it affects our politics or how it affects our country. I mean, they'll say, yeah, we got those. We got the test and that. But the sad part about it is that when other people, even J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois here in Illinois, called them out and said, hey, we were back in those days. I mean, I needed that. That's what we needed in our state. And that's what governors needed and mayors needed all over the country. We couldn't even get those types of kits. And so for you to, and it wasn't just, I mean, from my understanding, I could be wrong about this part of it. So I don't want to report anything. So why don't we even go into that portion of it? But from my understanding, this was actually something that they could use to, I guess, expand testing in their areas. So if they had the information or had the actual kit that they needed, or the test kits that they needed, they could actually do a lot of good in their states or their communities or things like that. And so for this to go to an adversary, and then not only have to be an adversary, but for someone to use it for their own personal use, not even for their own citizens.
Yeah. And also for reference, the Ukraine war didn't happen until Biden was in office. So this was prior to the Ukraine war, just to set the timeline. So those not sure when that war started. It hadn't started yet. Russia had not yet invaded Ukraine, although there was stuff that happened in 2014. But at that time, they weren't actively fighting Ukraine at the time. But there was still a lot of issues that was going on with Russia at the time. Many people, they say they're a communist country, but they're actually pretty fascist, pretty far right. And so that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of the alt-right representatives and other politicians in America actually now support Russia. Because
technically Russia is supposed to be a democratic nation.
Yeah, they're supposed
to be a democratic nation, but there is so much corruption and the oligarchs that pretty much finance Putin and also support him. I mean, you look at Putin's rise to power. He was appointed by Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin then says, "This is my guy." Boris Yeltsin was a serious alcoholic and was running the country during when perestroika and everything was going on back in the late '90s and things. He couldn't even half the time he would show up to meetings with the American leaders. I think I don't know if it was Bush or if it was Reagan. It was probably Bush at the time, Bush Senior, W. Bush, not W. Bush, but Herbert Walker Bush. I'm sorry, who actually he would tell you this guy's drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And then he appoints Putin as his successor because that was the only guy that could basically, handle his business. But the problem was his goal was never to be a democratic nation, but to rebuild the Soviet Union. He was a Kremlin guy. He was a KGB guy.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, that was one of the things that had gone on. Well, it's also not a fair democratic election if your opponents are killed or found guilty of something that they really don't have any evidence of, and then they can't actually run. So you don't really have an actual opponent to go against Putin.
Right.
So that's not a fair and democratic election right
exactly.
there. So
precisely.
It doesn't really work out. It's very frustrating, and it's very scary when Trump has said similar things so that he's like, if you vote for me, you don't have to vote ever again.
And you are the first person that has caught on to that. I've mentioned that before, but not on our show, but I mentioned that before. If you listen to him, he said that more than once. And I've heard him say it more than once. He said it, vote for me. You'll never have to vote for anybody else again. I promise you, you'll never have to do whatever again.
Yeah. JD Vance has also made similar reference in the last couple of weeks too. So it's quite interesting how this is starting to sound more like other countries that don't have the actual fair and honest elections anymore. It's pretty scary when you start thinking about that. One of the things that I find it very frustrating for this whole situation is that President Trump is then found to have lied again. And it's like, how can you trust a politician or somebody in office, in an elected office, that does lie? Because to me, if you lie to me, that means I know you have the potential to lie to me again. Mm-hmm. So how can I trust you again?
And that's interesting as well, because people that support Trump, and I believe it or not, I'm around a lot of Trump supporters. So what people will tell me all the time is that, all politicians lie. It's just that, his lies, how is his lies any worse than other guy's lies or that lady's lies and things like that? But they'll point to, and this is my concern, is that if Trump does win, he's like a person that gives out candy and does whatever he needs to do to be liked and does whatever he needs to do to look good. But what he's actually doing is undermining the whole process and actually setting you up for failure down the road. It's like if I have a child, I let him eat all the candy and ice cream and all the cake that he wants to eat. And I let him, drink all the soda he wants to drink. And I let him have, 18, you can have beer now, son. I want a beer, have a beer. That you're just setting that person up for a devastating life. That child will love you and think you're the greatest person ever in history. But the reality is that the thing is his economic policies, the changes he's done with our legal system, and his lack of attention to the things that really, really matter. Like, for example, when COVID hit, his lack of attention, thinking it was no big deal. Those types of things seriously have major effects on the country. But the problem is that most of his supporters can't connect the dots. They don't see when the shoe fell. It didn't fall on Trump's second term because he wasn't reelected. The shoe fell on Biden's doorstep.
Yes, it did. And the other thing about it is that when a particular party, a particular organization wants to take over and they don't want to do the actual, democratic, fair way of getting elected, what they also will do to also help with the base is to discredit the actual organization, the government system as a whole. Because if you don't trust the government, then how are you going to trust anything else that's going to be happening? But you could trust me, they say. Right. And then you're not going to want a democracy anymore because you don't trust it. You don't have faith in it. When you lose the faith, that's when the whole system is going to fail and then have to shift and change. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people believe that we're actually right. Well, actually, this is something that J.D. Vance has said, and he referenced that we're at the time at the very end of a republican, which is like the Romans, right before they switched from their republic to the actual empire. And, when they had their first emperor, everybody had discredited. They lost their faith in the republic, in everything that had built that great, interesting country that had pretty much, there was nothing like it in the world at the time. And that's what actually our founding fathers had modeled after, was after the Romans in the republic. So if we discredit it again, we're going to run into having an empire. And I'm a Star Wars fan, and I remember the Empire wasn't that great for everybody. They took advantage. They killed many people. It was horrible. And the thing is that happened again with the Romans in the Roman Empire, and they lost that. Everything that they had good going for them was gone because they lost the faith of it and the trust. And after that is when a lot of things happen. And so that part is really scary. A lot of people are very scared about the politics of that. And yes, a lot of politicians lie. A lot of politicians are technically protected when they lie, because there's a certain clause in the Constitution called the speech and debate clause. So anything that they say, they can't be held to perjury, which is really frustrating because the thing is that they can just straight up lie, like they've said with the PACT Act, because I like to use that as a reference, because they said that there's pork barrel spending that's not going to go to veterans. But if you go into that actual bill to look up for the money, the $200 million they said that was going to pork barrel spending, that was actually going to medical facilities. If you go through the bill and read it, you could see the truth. But Senator Pat Toomey, Senator Ted Cruz, they just straight up lied to people. But his constituents believe that, the Democrats and the liberals lie. So I'm going to trust what Ted Cruz says. And that's when you lose the faith with things. You have to really be able to reference and check what people are saying, no matter who they are. I'm not telling you to trust the Democrats. I'm telling you to trust your eyes and actually look up the information that they talk about. And now that we've got evidence that Trump lied, and with the Kremlin actually saying the opposite of what he's saying, how are you going to trust Trump now?
And then now we also have this idea that or at least what the court has said is that, presidents are pretty much immune to, anything they do with presidential acts is immune to any kind of prosecution. So even you can't even hold Trump accountable for treason for doing what he did with the test kits. And we said it before in this show, before Trump was elected. And I called it that Trump would probably be elected. I said he was going to be elected, and he was. I didn't think he was going to be reelected. But right now, I'm still kind of, iffy because it's still a tightrope. It's very much, it's not a done deal for Kamala Harris. She has a lot of support. But it's just a fact that she is, because the economy is not where people want, and it's very difficult. Politicians have to understand is that you can't tell somebody that they're not hungry.
Right.
You can't tell somebody they don't feel pain. And that's a surefire way to lose an election, is if you try to tell somebody that they don't feel what they actually feel. They just want you to fix it. Now, what might help is that if you explain why they're in the pain or why they're hungry, and tell them a not clear plan as to how you're going to fix it, that's a different thing. Now you got a conversation going. But the problem, like you mentioned, people don't go and read those bills. They don't go and look and do the research. And there's so much misinformation out there that it's hard to even find out what is real and what's not real.
Yeah. And honestly, every time I see an accusation or a statement about something, especially if it's in that little meme picture that you see on social media and has zero references, I screenshot, look at Google pictures and do the Google search and ask, legit? And it'll tell you, a lot of sites actually say now whether that is true or false. You can also use key phrases to see whether it's really true or false. It's also
I still have a problem with that because that could be hijacked. If you're looking at a website, and now you're going to trust because somebody said, "Oh, this is legit." Anybody can hijack that or fake that as well.
But you need to trust the ones that have the references.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are different things that are coming out there, like for FEMA, when it came for Hurricane Helene. Yes, you do get $750, but that is the first installment you get. That's not all you get. They're like, okay, let me give you the $750 to pay for the food and water and diapers that you need to get you set up. And then when you fill the rest of the paperwork out, we will get you what you need after that. So that statement that Trump said, it is partially true, but he didn't say the rest of it. And that's the thing. And then there was money that went from FEMA to DHS, but that money didn't come out of the actual disaster relief funds that people are receiving for Hurricane Helene. So that money that's going to hurricane victims wasn't taken out to go to immigrants. So it was partially true, but it also was partially false. But you need to check the references of the references, which is annoying. But those things that actually search and try to say whether it's legit or not, or whether it's true or false, always try to make sure it has as many details as possible to explain it. And that's the reason why it's really important to go into those details.
Stephanie Kalota, always a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right, thanks a lot. This is America's Heroes Group. Make sure you like and subscribe and check out our website, americashg.org, and look at us on YouTube. Leave your comments, because that way we can make better shows for you. This is Sean Claiborne. We'll see you in the next segment.